Every fall, our youth group hosted a fall retreat. And the fall retreat was held at this place not far from here in Moscow, Tennessee, called Country Place. Some of you have been there. And we would go after the football game on Friday night. The youth group would get in buses late after the games, and we would ride out there, and we would do like bonfire and all that stuff. And then we would spend the all day Saturday doing different sessions and playing out at the campgrounds. And then we would come back about midday on Sunday. And that was just the routine. I loved it. I couldn't wait for events like that because I was getting to be with my friends and all this stuff. But prior to that retreat event, I had been involved in what we call a discipleship group. Grace Valley Youth have discipleship groups now, and girls get together in smaller groups with girls, and guys get together in smaller groups with guys, and they're studying the Bible in deeper ways and just kind of getting more involved in their faith. And I was a part of a discipleship group in 1992. And our group and our leader, we had been reading the Bible, and so we decided that on this youth retreat weekend, we were going to try something we had never done before. We were going to fast for 24 hours. That's right, not eat any food for 24 hours, nothing but water. We were going to do it. And we didn't really know what we were doing, but our whole idea was we are going to not eat for 24 hours because we read about it in the Bible, and dadgummit, we want to know more about God, and we're going to do it because it's in the Bible. That's where we were. And we were, we're teenagers, we're teenage boys, we're just fired up. We're going to try to seek God. And truly, I will tell you, our genuine desire was to seek God. We were serious about this. And we were trying things. We were willing to take a chance on something. And so we got there, and we decided that because we got there really late on Friday, we were going to start at midnight Friday night and go to midnight Saturday night. That was the plan. So we decided to do this. We kind of locked arms together. We're going to do this. But we knew a little bit about fasting. We didn't know a whole lot. But we knew a little bit. And we said, if we're going to fast, we can't tell a bunch of people. We knew that there was something wrong about that. So we didn't tell a bunch of people. But we all knew in our little group. And we were going to go and fast. So all during the day, we were miserable. We were absolutely miserable. We were so hungry. We were teenage boys, man. We were hungry. And we were watching our friends go to the mess hall, and we would like sneak away and go find some lonely place to pray. Like it was like the greatest suffering any of us had ever felt, and we were out doing this. And then it got to the evening, and we somehow survived the day. Everybody stayed true to the commitment. We hadn't eaten anything at all. And we get to the evening. One of the things we did was we said, okay, around 11:45, we're going to sneak out of our cabins, and we're going to all meet up at the mess hall. So we're going to end this fast together. So we all sneaked out of our cabins, and we ran to the mess hall. And one of the guys left a window unlocked in the mess hall so we could break in, which I know breaking and entering and fasting somehow doesn't work together, but we did it anyway. We were teenage boys. We break into the mess hall, and we're waiting, and we're all watching our watches, watching the minutes click down. I think we went with whoever's watch was the slowest so that we could get there earlier. And we were going to get there, and we're going to eat together. So at the stroke of midnight, we raid the kitchen at this campgrounds, and we devoured all the leftover camp food. I remember sinking my teeth. I can just remember this so vividly into a cold fried chicken leg. Have anybody ever had leftover fried chicken? It's fantastic. This was the first time camp food was ever good. We were so hungry. It was like we were desperate to eat something, but we were serious. And I remember we kind of sat there looking at each other after we'd stuffed our faces with all this leftover food. And we're like, what do we do now? But that was my first experience fasting. So I'm really glad you guys came to church today. If you're watching online, I'm really glad you're tuning in to this message, because we're starting a new series today called Audience of One. And when you walked in, at least in the building here, if you came to in-person church, you got one of these. I would really like for everyone to have these. I actually told the guest services people to push them on you to try to make sure everybody gets one. There's a little place in the middle where you can take some notes, and I really want you to take some notes today. There's a lot of other stuff in here about fasting, which I'll come to later. But I want you just to have this in front of you and be ready for what we're going to talk about, because I really think this series represents a theme that I believe God has had us in as a church, that we have been walking this road trying to learn what it means to draw near to God, and that he would draw near to us. This has been a personal journey for me. I've probably kind of been brewing in me for the last year or so, just trying to learn how we get closer to God. How do we experience more of God? In fact, that's one of the things that I have heard from many of you, Many people that I know have gone to church traditionally, have known things about God. You want the same thing we were after in 1992. You want to know that there's more to this than just showing up at church. You want to know that there's more to this than just being a part of a so-called religion. You know there has to be more. And I have seen what seems to be like an uptick in desire for more. Like more people are actually after this. They actually want more. And it stands to reason, because when you come to a church and you come to this place where we supposedly interact with God, shouldn't that impact us? Shouldn't it make changes in us? Don't you want more? That's what we wanted back in 1992. And I believe that the whole thing we were after then was we were trying to figure out how to seek God more. We were teenagers. And we were trying to seek God more. And I believe that God has us on this journey of learning how to seek Him. Because I think for many of us, this happens to me too, that our mind's attention and our heart's affection get placed on other things besides God Himself. And I think God is in the work, in the business of trying to change that and bring us back to a place where our mind's attention and heart's affection is on Him. And so my question for you is, do you want more? We wanted more in 1992. As a group of teenage boys in a discipleship group, we knew that our attention was scattered. Our attention was on girls and sports and girls and cars and girls and girls and college and girls. Like that was about what we thought about. And we knew we needed to put our attention on God. We needed to seek Him more. So what about you? What has taken your attention from God? What has captured your attention? It doesn't have to be bad things, but something has probably captured your attention. And I think we all want more. We want more of God. We want more knowledge of His Word. We want more understanding of what it means to follow Jesus. We want to experience the power of the Holy Spirit. If these things are true, we want to know them. Well, Jesus jumps into, I think, a secret to finding more. It's in Matthew chapter 6. If you have a Bible, you can turn to it. Matthew chapter 6. In one sentence, Jesus sort of dives into this whole subject, and He says in verse 33, He says, "But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." So the precursor to Jesus saying this is recognizing that we all have things that take first place in our lives. We all have these things that we focus on. All the cares of the world, all the worries, all the anxiety, all the stuff that we deal with. We get so caught up in that stuff that Jesus felt the need to clarify, here's the real secret. If you want to know how to integrate faith and life, if you want to know the power of God, if you want to see God working, there's a way to get there. And it is by seeking first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all this other stuff will take care of itself. So let's break this down. The first thing Jesus says is seek first. Jesus understood that we have, as human beings, we have something inside of us. There's like a placeholder for whatever happens to be first. We have the ability to make priority decisions. And you guys know this as well as I do. It's like in our subconscious, in our brains, in our hearts, somewhere, there's a blank for the thing that is of first importance. We all have that. In any given moment, we can shift something that used to be first and put something else there. We can decide what is of first importance in our lives. And that's what Jesus is talking about, that the real source of life change and understanding who Christ is and understanding what He has for us through our faith starts with first place in your life. Those priority things that reach the first in your life. And so Jesus says, okay, there is a priority order. There is a blank inside of your heart and mind that you can put that thing that's most important to you. And Jesus tells us what He suggests you put there. He says, seek first His kingdom and His righteousness. Now, this might sound like strange language, but Jesus is talking about two specific things. One, He's talking about in seeking first His kingdom or God's kingdom, He's saying seek first God's rule and authority and governance in your life. Look, what would it look like for you to say, God, I want you to be in charge of my life? If you grew up in church, you may know language like this. God, I want you to be the Lord of my life, the master of my life. What does it look like to submit your life to the governance and the direction of God through his word? God governs with his word. So how do we submit our lives to the things of God? Every one of us has to make that decision. Do we want to do that? Are we willing to seek first his kingdom, his authority, his governance over our lives? And that's expressed by saying, God, I want to admit and acknowledge that I'm a bad governor of my life. This is why he suggests that we put him first, because it's not hard to look at your life and evaluate the last several months of decisions you've made to decide whether you're good at that job or not. If we just based this decision on merit alone, would you even qualify to be a good enough leader for your own life? Are you that good at decision making? I seriously doubt it. So Jesus says there's a way for your life to come under the leadership of God, and it's by seeking him first. Well, then he adds this other part to it. He says, not only seek first his kingdom, but he says seek first his righteousness. Now, this is a little bit different. It means following his ways. So not only do we follow his word, we follow his ways. Jesus was the ultimate example of what it means to live this life. And so to seek his righteousness is to seek living the life that Jesus lived. We follow after Jesus. But more than that, it comes with having to admit something too. On the first hand, you admit that you're not a good enough leader of your life. In this case, you have to admit that you're not righteous enough for your own life. You're not righteous enough in your own standing before God. So this is saying, Jesus, I'll never be good enough for God. And so I'm seeking your righteousness on my behalf. I'm seeking after what you've done for me. And so here we have these two things. He says, I want you to put these things first, submitting to his word and following his ways. This is what I want you to do. This is how you seek him first. This is what it means to truly experience the more that we're all after. So I want to give you a chance to write something down. On your listening guide, if you can create like a little box somewhere, just a box where you can scribble some notes. You're going to want to use fine print because this is going to be a little bit vulnerable. I'm going to ask you, if you were to just do some quick self-evaluation right here in this moment, if you were to say, God, what is going on in my life that is not currently submitted to your word or in alignment with your ways? What would come to mind? If you were to just ask God, just honestly, God, is there anything in my life that's not in submission to your word or is not in alignment with your ways? God, what would those things be? I will tell you that probably for everyone who's genuinely asking the question, 2 or 3 things pop to mind really fast. It's those first few things that we don't like to think about, so you probably already swept them under the rug because that's what we do. We're like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. Let's just go to the next thing. So pay attention to whatever first came to your mind. Now, let me tell you a little secret about me. When I write these sermons, as much as I want to sometimes, I don't get out of this stuff. I was sitting in my study this week, and I had written this section of the sermon, and I was like, wait a minute. If I'm going to ask you to ask that, I got to ask it of me. And I'm not going to show you everything that came to mind, but I'll show you one thing that came to my mind. This was the first thing that came to my mind. I was sitting there. I thought, okay, I've got to be courageous. I've got to face this. And this is what came to my mind. I have been dealing with some significant anxiety and worry and stress over the last few months. And there's reasons for all that, which I won't share. But there's a lot of that going on in my life right now. And I wouldn't say it's debilitating, but it's almost. It's the kind of thing that I wake up in the middle of the night and think about. It's the thing that occupies all of my mental energy and emotional energy all throughout the day. So here's what I do. I wake up in the morning intending to read the Bible, but I end up reaching for my phone. And I open up my email because I'm feeling all this stress and all this anxiety and all this worry, and something in me says, if I can just answer an email, maybe that email will be part of what makes me feel at peace finally. Maybe I can answer enough questions. Maybe I can check off enough tasks. Maybe I can check enough information. I have apps on my phone that I look at, like key information about things going on in my life. And maybe if I just look at that information enough, I'll be at peace finally. And it's all a lie. And I am actively believing a lie when I know clearly what the Bible teaches. God tells us, cast your anxiety on him because he cares for you. I know clearly what God has said to do with my anxiety. I am to throw it like I'm casting a fishing pole out there. I'm to throw it on God. God, your problem, not mine. That's what I'm supposed to do. But what do I do instead? I hold it. I hug it. I think about it all the time. I let it be first place. That's what I do. And so I'm just sharing that with you. I don't need you to feel sorry for me. I share that with you because I want you to be just as honest and vulnerable on your listening guide right now. I want you to write something down right now. Would you be that courageous? You can hide your paper so no one can look. You can make it sneaky, but I'm just wondering, would you be courageous enough to say, okay, God, I'm asking you honestly, what in my life is not submitted to your word or in alignment with your ways? Would you show me, God? I can just about guarantee God will show you something. Just write it down. And then just keep it in a corner on your page, and we'll get back to it later. But I want you to write it down. Because Jesus told us there's a promise associated with putting him first. This is an awesome promise. That all these things, he says in verse 33, all these things that would otherwise be in first place will be given to you or added to you as well. What that means is God will oversee these other things, and they don't have to occupy that first place that often disrupts our lives, because the first place in our life was intended for one person, Jesus. And when we put other things in that spot, our lives tend to spiral out of control in some way or another. So we need to seek God, not because God is like selfish and needs a bunch of people to praise him. He's not insecure. It's because he knows what's best for us. And so when we put him first, we begin to experience life as he intended it. So there's a promise there. If we seek him, these other things will take care of themselves. Now, seeking God is not necessarily an easy task. It does involve some effort on our part. Seeking God takes a little bit of work. This is where the whole subject of spiritual disciplines comes into the conversation. Some of you are aware of that phrase, spiritual disciplines, but let's explain it through normal disciplines because we're more aware of those kind of things. If you want to create life change anywhere in your life, then discipline is the science that governs life change. Discipline is the science of life change. Usually life changes in our lives. Let's take, every one of us has faced that moment where we look in the mirror and we don't like what we see, or we look at a scale and we don't like what we see. And so we say, okay, we want to do something about that. So the first thing that drives most decision making for us is emotions. We feel emotionally caught up in something like, I got to change that. And I don't like that. And that motivates you to take a step to get a gym membership or start a diet or whatever. But if you don't add the science side, not just the emotion, but the discipline side, then you won't stick it out. Because the very same people that were absolutely convinced something's got to change are the same people who pay for a gym membership but never go, who start diets and never finish them. Why? Because we need discipline. And we all know that discipline produces a change. And that's where spiritual disciplines come in. There are disciplines we can take on for the purpose of spiritual transformation. And we need spiritual transformation. This is how we understand what God has for us, which of course brings us back to CrossFit. So about 14 years ago, I started my CrossFit career. I like to say career because it makes it sound more important. I started my CrossFit career, which is basically middle-aged fitness is what it really amounts to. But the reason I started, I had never heard of it before. And there was a guy that I went to church with. He came up to me and he said, hey, I know you like to work out and stuff. I'd like you to come to this CrossFit gym that I'm opening up. He started a brand new CrossFit gym here in town. And I was like, okay, cool. I have no idea what this is, but I'll go free session at the gym. So I went, and I was like, oh, no. I don't even understand the words they were using. They were describing exercises I had never seen before. They were describing exercises in such a way that made me go, no, wait a minute. That's not what my high school football coach told me. I was questioning everything. I don't need to do that. And I was very resistant. They would say, here, do this. And I would go, no, I can't do that. That's for someone else, not me. Well, I happened to stick with it. And what's funny is now, I look back at those early days when I was started CrossFit. There were things I hated. I thought I would never be good at that. I could never do that movement, but I'm actually good at it now. And some of those movements are the things I love the most about CrossFit now. See, that's not very different from spiritual disciplines. Sometimes someone will mention a spiritual discipline and you will go, oh, no, can't do that. That's not for me. That's for like preachers and people like that, but that's not for me. And I just want to propose that maybe there are some spiritual disciplines that are available to you that if you just gave them a chance, they would produce change in you, spiritual transformation. God would use them to create spiritual transformation in your life that you would otherwise, you may not ever experience. So spiritual disciplines are the science of spiritual transformation. And in Matthew 6, earlier in this chapter that we're reading, Jesus actually tells us about 3 specific spiritual disciplines that we need to consider. And they are prayer, giving, and fasting. And he talks about these 3 specifically together because they all have something in common. They are best expressed, most authentically expressed in secret. Many theologians call these the secret disciplines of the faith. Because the idea behind these 3 things, prayer, giving, and fasting, is that by doing them in secret, you can guard against this issue of why am I doing it? Because we all have the tendency to do things so that other people see. And that's the thing about spiritual disciplines. If we do them so that God sees, then we benefit the most from it. But when we do things for everybody else to see, that's like bad form. Everybody's been to a gym before. Everybody's worked out before. One of the greatest ways to get hurt in a gym is to do good movements with bad form. That's also true of spiritual disciplines. And we want to understand that if we do spiritual disciplines, these particularly prayer, giving, and fasting, for the approval of others, that's bad form. And it will actually reverse growth. Instead of it leading to spiritual transformation, it will actually harm you. It will not lead to spiritual transformation. And so Jesus helps us understand how to really fast. And so let me give you a few things about fasting, and we're going to talk later in the series about prayer and about giving. We're going to do a deep dive on these spiritual disciplines, but today we're going to talk about fasting. I know you're excited about that. I can see it on your faces, right? Some of you are already, you saw it in the listing, you're already like, nope, not for me. I just want you to consider. Just consider. Just be open. Suspend your judgment for a few minutes. Just consider. Let's talk about fasting. So, plainly understood from the Bible, fasting is not eating food. That's what fasting is. I know a lot of people talk about fasting like they're going to fast from social media or fast from TV. That's technically called abstaining. That's also a very helpful spiritual discipline. But when we talk about fasting, we are essentially talking about not eating food, because we can sort of predict a scenario there. When we were in high school and we did our fast, our 24-hour fast, we felt the pain of hunger. We so badly wanted to eat. And that's sort of the point of fasting, is that you get in touch with this very visceral desire to fulfill a need. And it allows you to say, God, I want to seek you the same way my body is seeking food. And it's a way to get in touch with this idea of seeking first. Because we are so given to putting our natural desires above God that if we can limit a natural desire for a season of time, it gives us almost like a clean slate to put God first for a moment, to put God first for a season and realize, no, he's faithful. So Fasting is not eating. Fasting is always for the purpose of seeking God, and it's for the purpose of creating this time and space for prayer. The idea is that you don't just stop eating. That's just not eating, is what that's called. But fasting accompanied with strategic prayer is the spiritual discipline. That's what it is. It's fasting and prayer together. Fasting is this willingness to let go of earth in order to grab hold of heaven. There's a guy named David Goggins. He's a former Navy SEAL. He's an ultramarathon runner. This is a great quote. He said, "Our whole life is set up on the path of least resistance. We don't want to suffer. We don't want to feel discomfort. So the whole time we are living our lives in a very comfortable area. There's no growth in that." And we all know that to be true. Struggle and suffering and difficulty is often the path of growth. And if you're not willing to be discomforted in some way, then you're really not willing to grow. Because growth, by its very definition, requires you to break status quo. Fasting is an opportunity to do that. Fasting is like self-imposed suffering. Measured, but self-imposed suffering so that we can seek Him first. So, how do we do this with proper form? How do we do it right? If we're going to do it, if you're even considering fasting and prayer, how do we do it? Jesus actually tells us exactly how to do it with proper form. Look in Matthew 6, verse 16. He says, "When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full." So Jesus is actually taking a shot at the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day. They were the Jewish religious group that really prided themselves on being very consistent of upholding the law. And so Jesus is saying, wait a minute, these guys aren't doing it right. They're basically fasting so that other people can see them fasting. They are more interested in the approval of men than they are the approval of God. And so Jesus says, what do? They walk around all somber, and they're so sad, and they're suffering so much because they're hungry, and they contort their faces to look really sad, and they're doing all this. You know what that's called? That's called being hangry. Give that man a Snickers. Like, that's what needs to happen. But that's the whole point. Jesus says, when you are treating fasting as a show, like, let me just grandstand my faith. I'm more holy. I'm better off. That is the problem. That's bad form. And you know, when we perform disciplines with bad form, we will end up getting hurt, or we will not get the benefit of the movement, of the discipline. And so Jesus said, don't fast like that. Don't be like the hypocrites. All they do is they grandstand all these actions because they want everyone else to think they're godly. And he says they've received their reward in full. Meaning, whatever somebody claps for them on the side, that's it. That's all you get out of this. They aren't getting the spiritual transformation that they could have experienced if they truly honored God with a true fast. So Jesus goes on in verse 17. He says, verse 17 says, "But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." So Jesus said, here's how you do it right. I'll translate it into our language. The oil on the head, and he basically just means, look your best. Do what you normally do before you go to work. Like, comb your hair, take a shower, shave, look right. Don't make it obvious that you're fasting. He says, because fasting is a secret discipline, and because it's secret, your heavenly Father, who is unseen, he actually sees what's done in secret, and he will reward you for it. And so, secrecy, humility, and seeking him first is proper form for fasting. How do we do it? Secrecy, we don't tell everybody. Humility, we humble ourselves, and we put ourselves in a posture of seeking God. That's why we do it. If you are doing a spiritual fast to lose weight, you're doing it for the wrong reason. A spiritual fast is for the purpose of seeking God. If you're doing it so everybody sees you, that violates humility. So it's a counterproductive activity. If you're doing it out in the open so everybody knows, well, that violates the principle of secrecy. Now, I will say this, one caveat to the secrecy thing. I shared with you in 1992 that I did this with a group of guys in my discipleship group. Healthy support and accountability is not the same thing as grandstanding your spiritual discipline. Some of you would benefit greatly if you entered into a season of fasting to bring some accountability people around you, to trust that with one or two people just so they can pray for you and they can walk with you. If you're married, that's a great thing to share between you and your spouse, is to say, hey, I'm going to be fasting during this time and I'd love for you to be supportive and prayerful for me. Not grandstanding so everyone knows. There's a difference there. But it's healthy to have that kind of support as you go through this. And so he says this last thing, though, that's really interesting. He says, and your Father who's in heaven will reward you, which now brings up the whole subject of reward. Wait a minute, there's a reward? Actually, the Bible talks a lot about rewards. And if there's a reward attached to a certain discipline, maybe that will motivate us to move towards that. It's okay to go after the reward. So what are the rewards of fasting? I really want you to write these down. 3 things. Number 1, the first reward of fasting is knowing God's heart. See, by fasting and seeking him first, humbly and in secrecy, we gain understanding of God's perspective. Now, here's what I want you to think about. Who in your life represents a difficult relationship? You have a difficult relationship with somebody? If there's a difficult relationship, I want you to take time to fast and pray and ask God to show you his heart for that person. That's what we need to know. It's so easy to be hurt by someone or to be frustrated with someone that you then start to treat them poorly. And maybe we just need to hear God's heart. We need to know his heart about people. Jesus had this experience. In John chapter 4, Jesus was walking with his friends, his disciples, and they stopped in a little town called Samaria. And he stopped at a well where he met this woman. It's the famous encounter of Jesus and the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. Jesus has this incredible encounter with her while his disciples were off getting food. By the time they get back, Jesus has already done this transformative work in her life. She's run back to tell everybody. He's sitting there by himself. And they say this in verse 31 and 32. He says, they say, Rabbi, eat something. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. See, Jesus, by encountering this Samaritan woman, had learned her heart, learned God's heart for her, ministered to her, and then he was fulfilled to a degree that he didn't even need food. He was fulfilled. He received this reward of setting aside a physical earthly desire and experiencing a spiritual reward. Some of you have a person in your life that you simply need God to help you understand his heart for that person. I was looking back at some notes I took at a counseling seminar I went to a long time ago, and it says, this is a great quote, if we can put someone outside of our circle of acceptance, we can dehumanize them and justify anything. Gossip, malicious talk, and unforgiveness. We do that, don't we? Someone offends us and we put them outside of our circle of acceptance. We don't accept them anymore. And that allows us to create enough distance between us and them and our group and them. And then we get to justify treating them poorly because they're not in our circle. And so we do horrible things. We gossip. We speak malicious talk. We hold unforgiveness back from them. So I want you to think about this, because part of fasting and seeking him first is understanding God's heart for the people around you. Some of you desperately need this. You need to know God's heart about the people around you. But some of you, you need to know God's heart for yourself. Because somewhere along the way, you picked up a script inside your heart and your mind that you're not worthy of people's love, that you're not acceptable to people, that you somehow don't measure up, and you need to know God's heart for you. That woman at the well, by sitting with Jesus, she learned God's heart for her. And maybe you need to know God's heart for you. One way to fast and pray is to say, God, I'm setting aside time to separate myself from the things of earth, food, whatever it may be that you're fasting from, in order to pray. And God, I want to know your heart toward me and towards others around me. So you seek God's heart. That's a reward. One last thought on this. Fasting can also be a way to process your grief with God. Grief over loss and grief over failure. A lot of times our grief causes us to doubt God's heart. How could this happen? God, how could you have let this person pass away? How could you have let this failure so disrupt my life? And we start to question and we distance ourselves from God. Maybe you need to fast and pray to grieve appropriately. And say, God, these things I've gone through, I need to grieve them with you through fasting and prayer. Number 2, the second reward of fasting is hearing God's voice. We need clarity and wisdom. We need the conviction of sin. We need his guidance. We need to hear his voice. Look at this in Acts chapter 13. It says, while they were worshiping the Lord and... There we go. You got to play along with me, team. Here we go. As they were worshiping the Lord and... There we go. The Holy Spirit said, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I've called them. So after they had and prayed, they placed their hands on them and sent them off. What happened in this moment? They were seeking God through fasting and prayer, asking for God's voice, asking God to speak into a situation. And he did. He said, set apart these 2 men to send them out on this mission, and they did what God told them to do. Some of you have a situation in your life where you desperately need to know God's voice on a matter. You need to know his wisdom. You need guidance in decision making. I would tell any of you that have young adult children who are looking to get married, they need to include, at least consider to include, fasting and prayer before they run off and get engaged. A lot of people rush into that because all their friends that are about the same age as them are getting engaged and getting married too. And there's no real wisdom or clarity. There's just getting caught up in the flow of what everybody else is doing. Young people, before you go off and get engaged, fast and pray over it. Say, God, I want to hear your voice on this. Is this the right move? Is this where you have me? Fast and pray and say, God, I want to hear your voice on it. Some of you have major business decisions in front of you. God, what do I do here? Fast and pray. Say, God, I want to hear your voice. What's my next move here? Listen to God's voice. And there's a reward of hearing his voice. Some of you need his voice to speak strongly about a sin in your life that you've been unwilling to come to grips with. You've been unwilling to call it what it is, and you just sort of metabolize it and say, it's okay for me and I can just do this. And you need to hear God's voice say, that's wrong for you. That's out of bounds for you. And you need to use a season of fasting to come to clarity around conviction of sin. Allow God's voice to speak to your life. And the third reward is seeing God's hand. We want to know his heart. We want to hear his voice. We want to see his hand. This will be specific answers to prayer. Praying for people's needs to be met, for healing to happen. Now, in Daniel chapter 1, this is the case where Daniel just got carted off to Babylon, and he was trying to figure out his next move. He was needing God's help. Look at this. I'm not going to read every verse, but starting in verse 8, it says, but Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. He established he's going to fast from this. He's not going to partake in all this great food of the king. Verse 12, he talks to the master that was over him. He said, test your servant for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables and only in water to drink. And so the master listened to him and tested him for 10 days. Verse 15, at the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh, which means healthier, than all the other youths who ate the king's food. Verse 18, at the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in his kingdom. So Daniel entrusted as a fast not to engage in eating the same food as the king. It was tested and it was proven God's hand was at work, and he sustained those men at a higher level than all the other men around him. He sought God's hand and God responded. Ezra, same thing, verse 8, verse 21, he said, I proclaim to fast that we might humble ourselves before our God and ask him for safe journey for us and our children with all of our possessions. I was ashamed to ask the king for soldiers and horsemen to protect us from enemies on the road, because we had told the king, the gracious hand of our God is on everyone who looks to him. But his great anger is against those who forsake him. So we fasted and petitioned our God about this, and he answered our prayer. Ezra had told the king, we don't need your soldiers to guard us. God will protect us. Only to show up on the day he was supposed to travel, and he got scared. I'm not sure we're going to be protected. Is God going to show up for us? So they fasted and prayed that God would protect them. And then they entrusted themselves to God, and he did protect them. He answered prayers. Some of you have a prayer request, a need in your life, a need in the life of someone else that you know, that you need to fast and pray over to see God's hand move. To trust him with that request. And to say, God, we want to see your hand move. And you know what? In all of these things, fasting is not a lever that we pull to get what we want from God. It's not a magic trick to get God to do what we want him to do. Because at the end of the day, we will be rewarded for a proper fast because we will be closer to him. We'll draw near to him and he will draw near to us. We will experience his presence in a different way. What I have seen in my own fasting and the fasting of others is that those prayer requests that don't seem to get answered the way we want get lost in our confidence that God is in control anyway. And we trust him. So I would encourage you to consider fasting. Are you ready to seek him first? Are you ready to say, God, I want to seek you first? Well, as you can imagine, I'm going to encourage you to fast. And we started this series on this day to give you a couple of days warning and an opportunity to pray and to thoughtfully consider joining us in a 21-day season of fasting and prayer. Let me start out by saying I'm not suggesting that everybody not eat any food for 21 days. What we have created in your listening guide, there is some write-up about fasting in here. There's a little bit more on our website that you can go to, but we actually have a tool on our website that you can go through and you get to design a plan for fasting during these 21 days that is tailor-made for you. Obviously, if you have health concerns and things like that, you need to talk about that with the proper people. But in terms of engaging in a fast, it would be, we've outlined several different ways that you could do it, whether it's removing one meal a day for 21 days, removing certain types of food from your diet for the 21 days. Maybe in addition to those things, removing some other vices, abstaining from some other things that you know get in the way of seeking God first. And so I strongly want you to be encouraged to think through this and pray through this. Would you be willing to participate in this 21 days of fasting starting this Wednesday? We're having our first Wednesday service where we're going to have a meal together. And after that meal, we're kicking off our fast. And it will go for 21 days. It will end right before Thanksgiving. I wasn't about to make you go over Thanksgiving. But it will end right before there. And we have the opportunity during this 21 days to seek him first, so that we might know his heart, hear his voice, and see his hand. And I know there are some of you that are still in your heart and your mind, you're pushing back against this. I'm not doing this. This is for other people. It's not for me. I will say this. You don't have to do it. I want to remove all guilt. This doesn't earn you any place with God. This doesn't add to your salvation. You don't have to do this. But I would strongly encourage you to try. Because I do believe that Jesus' words are true, that when we approach a fast in the proper way, there's a reward for us. And if God's handing out rewards, I want one. I want to know his heart. I want to hear his voice, and I want to see his hand. I think for some of you, and myself included, this could be absolutely spiritual transformation that takes place over these 21 days. So I want you to consider that. And to kick this off, today we're actually taking the Lord's Supper together. If you have these in your hand, you can just put them in your hand. The setup on the Lord's Supper is that this is like another spiritual discipline Jesus gave us. For all those who are genuine believers in Jesus, who are followers of Christ, that we come together periodically and we take the Lord's Supper, which means we take a piece of bread, which represents Jesus' sacrifice for us. It's like a demonstration of his love for us. He allowed his body to be broken so that we could be free from the penalty of sin. And then to drink the cup It's a representation of Jesus' blood that covers our sins. It pays the price for our sin. And one of the things I want you to do, because I want to come back to that little box or those 3 things that you may have written down on your listening guide. I wonder if you'd be willing, before we take the Lord's Supper, that during this time of reflection and self-examination, that you would confess those things to God and say, God, I'm sorry for these things. I'm sorry for not putting you first. That you would confess your sins to the Lord. Because the Lord's Supper gives us an opportunity to go back to ground zero in our faith. We go back to the place where Jesus gave his life for us and we say, okay, because you gave your life for me, there's no shame in telling the truth to you about me, God. I can tell you that I've sinned. I can confess my struggles. I can confess my weakness to you, knowing I've already been forgiven. And so I want to give you an opportunity to take a moment to pray and to examine your hearts. This is one of the ways that we obey the scripture to not come to the Lord's table in an unworthy manner. That we would truly examine our hearts and confess to God where something might not be in submission to his will or in alignment with his ways. In fact, when I was growing up in church, I told you this, I've grown up in a Baptist church and we would take the Lord's Supper. And I remember moments, and I'm sure it was because the pastor said this, and so I'm going to be as bold as my pastor was when I was a kid. If there is someone in this room that you need to go to say, I'm sorry for how I've treated you, or I was wrong when I said this or that, or I've been holding unforgiveness over you, that you would walk across this room and go to that person before taking these elements, and you would say, look, I need to make things right with you. I remember as a kid watching grown adults do that in a church service. I really hope we don't think we're past that, because we're people. It's reasonable to think that we would have issues with each other. It's reasonable to think that we have things to confess to God. Some of you might need to come down to these stairs just to pray. Not because these stairs are holy, but because it's a step of showing your faith to God, saying, God, I need to do business with you. That's what this time is for. So I'm going to give you a moment to pray and to examine your heart. These guys are going to sing this song over us as you do this time of prayer. So take a moment right where you're seated to pray.
When the music fades and all is stripped away, I simply come. I'm longing just to bring something that's of worth that will bless your heart. I'll bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. You search much deeper within, through the way things appear. You're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made it. When it's all about you, it's all about you, Jesus.
Once we've had time to examine our hearts, if you'll take the bread and just place it in your hand. Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it and he said to his disciples, this is my body that's given to you. As often as you eat this, remember me. Remember the sacrifice I've made for you. So as you sit there this morning, if you're next to your spouse and you're able to just get closer to them, just lean in. Maybe before you take the elements, you just look at them and say, I'm sorry, if there's need to be. I want us to be connected. Just don't pass up this opportunity. And so as we lean in with each other and with the Lord, we take the bread. And likewise, Jesus took the cup and he said, "This is the new covenant of my blood. And every time you drink it, remember me." And this is the memory. This is the way we remember the forgiveness of sins that we have. Which means there's nothing that stands between us and God. And so let's take the cup together. The custom of Christians for centuries has been that every time we do this spiritual discipline of taking the bread and the cup together, we would do two things. One, that we would worship together, which we will do in just a moment, and that we would take a collection. And so today, all the cash that's put in the black boxes will go directly towards our benevolence ministry that we use regularly to help those with different needs in our church body and around our community. So just know that that's available as well. But I'm going to ask you to stand. We're going to worship together this song. If you still need to do business with God, there's time to come down front to pray. There'll be those down here to receive you and pray with you if you'd like. But let's use this time to respond to the Lord.
King of endless worth, no one could express how much you deserve. And poor, all I have is yours, every single breath. Sing, I'll bring you more than a song. I'll bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. You search much deeper within, through the way things appear. You're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made it, when it's all about you. It's all about you. I'm coming back. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made it, when it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'll bring you more than a song. I'll bring you more than a song. It's all about you. It's all about, can we sing that? I'll bring you more than a song. I'll bring you more than a song. I'll bring you more than a song. It's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'll bring you more than a song. I'll bring you more than a song. It's all about you. It's all about you. It's all about you. It's all about you. We sing, it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus.
All right, you can go ahead and have a seat for a few minutes. If you're a guest here today and you filled out the info card that's in your listening guide, you can drop those in the black boxes as you exit. It's also where we take our tithes and offerings, so if you came prepared to give of your tithes and offerings, you can drop those in the black boxes as well, or you can go online to gracevalley.memphis.org/give to set up online giving there. Also want to remind you, Trunk or Treat is this afternoon from 4 to 6. We have an exciting day planned. We have 21 trunks that are available, or that will be set up. We have a hayride, we have goats, chills, food truck will be here ready to serve everyone, and so we will have a great time. Make sure you come dressed up or I will judge you and tell you that I'm judging you. And so it's going to be a great afternoon. We will have a wonderful day, so be sure to be here partaking in that. I used it right this time. First service, I messed up. First Wednesday is coming up. Andy mentioned it.